Welcome to the Be Empowered podcast with your host, Graham Hopkins. My goal is to help you regain your power by bridging the gap between who you think you are right now and who you really are. In simple language, that is like making your childhood dreams come true. This is for those who want to make an impact in their lives but don't know how to get there. Be ensured, when you know and feel connected to your spiritual mind, you master your world. So welcome everyone to the Be Empowered Show. I'm your host, Graham Hopkins. The Be Empowered Show is really a conversation about what it's like to feel connected to your truth as opposed to feeling disconnected from it. Today, I'm really excited because I have a guest, Stephen Garrett, from embraceyourdeath.com, and he's also the author of When Death Speaks, Listen, Learn and Love. Now, Stephen, I believe, is a very connected guy. You know, they say that people's two greatest fears are the fear of public speaking and the fear of death. And Stephen is here today to teach us how to overcome both. So, welcome, Stephen Garrett.
Thank you, Graham. It's a pleasure to be here with you all, and I'm having a lot of fun watching you on my Samsung telephone and seeing my little face down there as well. So, welcome to your listeners. And my wish is that we have a great chat and that somebody learns something about how not to be quite so fearful of both public speaking and of death.
Great. So, Stephen, since this show is about feeling connected to a higher power, I'd like to ask you a question. Has there been a time in your life when you've actually felt disconnected?
Oh, yeah. What a great question. For the first 40 years of my life, Graham, I felt pretty disconnected, though in my mind I thought I was certainly living life. Me, who I was not connected to it at all. I was on automatic pilot. I was pursuing the North American dream. I was chasing money and BMWs and all those things that I thought I ought to, and I was just sound asleep. Interestingly enough, Graham, May the 5th, 1988, my dear sister Jodi passed away suddenly and unexpectedly. So her death was shocking to me. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. She was too young. She was too compassionate. She was too community-minded to die that quickly. And so I entered into a bargaining process with what I then thought was God, and offered up my BMW, offered up my ping golf clubs, offered up my RSP, all this stuff to try and get my sister back. And in that offering, what I learned was that all that stuff didn't really matter. Not that there's anything wrong with golf clubs or abundance or money or anything like that. There's nothing wrong with it. It just didn't matter as much as I thought it was. What mattered most to me was that my late sister Jodi was dead and I'd never get to hug her again. That her beingness, the essence of her, was now unavailable to me in human body form. And that day, and 6 months after her death, I decided to cash in the chips and head west and begin my career as a social worker and as a spiritual teacher and a helper of people. And so in that little story, although my sister died and I had a great loss, right beside it was a brilliant gift. I got my life back. I got woken up to my connection with what I call a great mystery. And although I miss my sister deeply, I'm eternally grateful for her passing, if that makes sense to you. Miss her deeply, really grateful, because in her dying, I got my life back. I got my beingness back. I got my capacity to be in contact with others really back. And that was a gift I've never forgotten.
So, Stephen, would it be fair in saying that ever since you've been demystifying this whole death experience?
Yes, absolutely. And you can look at, life and death are kind of the same side of the whole equation. And as I began to chew away at what is life, I also began to chew away, well, what is death? And is there a death? And what happens after? And, this beingness that I've stumbled into, this sense of oneness, this sense of God, if you will, this sense of divine truth, it always seems to be around. So I just started to explore things spiritual, which include both living and dying. And so whenever I was traveling in India, in Egypt, in Kenya, in Peru, in Costa Rica, in Hawaii, in England, wherever I was, I would find shaman or guru or teacher. And that's all we talk about. What is life and what is death? And is there a meeting place for both of them? And what is that meeting place? And is it me in life and is it me in death? Do I continue? And seems to me that there is a me living in this human body, and it seems to me through my experience that it's ongoing. I always have been, I always will be. This time I just popped up as this guy, and I'll pop up as something else next. So I've been fortunate to sit at the feet of many great teachers, all from different cultures and different religions, but with the same foundational belief in we're a human being plus something.
And do you think you've had to come to terms with this whole topic of death in order to become and feel so connected and so present?
Absolutely. For me, and that's the reason for the name of my website, Embrace Your Death, if I'm unable as a human being plus spirit to really face the fact, the known fact, the unarguable fact that this body will die one day, somehow that lack of embrace results in less embrace of my life. It becomes almost like too comfortable, like I'm unbreakable in some way and that life will just go on. And that lack of acknowledgement that one day I'll die and I don't know when has me pulled back from the edge of life and death. I don't live quite as fully as I could because I'm frightened to risk it and to step into that place of beingness and being bigger. So by embracing my death, it really has inspired me to live a much more passionate life. I mean, look at us, Graham. We're connecting through the ethers, countries away, hours away from each other. And it's exquisitely beautiful. It may never happen this way ever again. We may never talk again. You may pass away, I may pass away. This moment is so rich and so alive and so vital because of my willingness to face my own death and look myself in the eyes and go, yeah, one day you're out of here, buddy. Best live each day as fully as I can because I don't know when that one day will be.
I have this theory that we are all connected. All 7 billion people in this world are all connected. But the problem is that we don't perceive that we're connected.
Yeah, that's correct.
And maybe fear, which would include the fear of death, is one of the reasons why we don't feel connected.
I would put this to you, Graham, that you're absolutely right. And I've been taught by some of these great masters that the most difficult death to face isn't the death of the body, it's the death of the ego or the personality that kind of consumes the body. And our unwillingness to get that we're not individual, we're actually connected, is a real affront to the ego. Because the ego wants to demonstrate, I'm Stephen Garrett and I'm one and I'm separate and I'm important. And those things are true, but underneath all that is the fact that we are all connected. And maybe, Graham, the space that we walk through isn't empty. Maybe the space we walk through in life is full of our beingness or our essence. And that we're actually walking through each other in sort of sound asleep human bodies, not noticing what we're doing. And that's my take on it. You know, people think that we're in the body. What happens if we're outside the body, but seeing through it? You know, there's all kinds of things you can play with. And I have experienced that connectedness of all things. You know, through some work with these great teachers and shaman from around the world, it's not hard with good practice to stumble into the oneness or the beingness and notice that there's a me and everybody else all at the same time, and I don't have any boundaries. So there is something there. I've experienced it in the pyramids in Giza in Egypt. I've experienced it in the plains out in the Serengeti. I've experienced it in the jungle of Peru. There's something there, absolutely.
Can you share with us what you would class as a good practice? Just a small little hint of what one can do to feel connected in this way.
Well, one thing I do that may seem very simplistic and a bit odd is whenever I meet a stranger, I make great eye contact with them. I look at them. I see them. I open my heart fully and do my best to make heart contact with them. And then I do a simple thing. I ask them their name. And then I give them mine. Because if I'm right, if we're a human being plus something, or we're human plus spirit, my spirit meeting their spirit is a very sacred or godly thing to do. And although that may seem like a simple practice, if it's done with good intention and persistence each and every day, profound things start to happen. The separation between us and others starts to diminish. We start to notice that there's human beings everywhere just like us. And it starts to bring some magic to life, because we notice that there really is somebody over there that is different than us, but we can connect with. I had a young man in Calgary asking to have me help him find God. So I said, sure. And I gave him that practice. And he was disappointed initially. He said, what? Just that? I said, do that for 21 days and call me back. And with reluctance, but yet with a good heart, he took it on. He was hoping I would have him do some, stand on your head, do a finger pose, all that kind of silly stuff, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But he practiced it daily. And he met people on, subways and buses and at work that he didn't know. And every person he met that he didn't know, he did that practice with. He called me in about 19 days, tears pouring down his eyes, weeping deeply. He said, oh my God, I just had this experience of the great mystery or the one or the divine or the truth or God, just from this simple little practice. And I was quite pleased because I just made it up. And it actually worked.
I must admit, I need to acknowledge my wife Susanna here, because she is very natural and very fluent at doing what you're suggesting there.
Yeah, it's a beautiful practice, Graham, and if nothing else, it goes a long way to breaking down the barriers in our culture, and breaking down the separateness, and breaking down the lack of spirituality, and breaking down the lack of real community. I do it oftentimes. I'll go into the poorer sections of town and just walk around the streets and greet people who other people will push away as, throwaway people, welfare bums, homeless people. And just calling their name out loud makes a big difference to them in their life. Somebody's actually taken the time to notice them, ask them their name, and shake their hand. It's a real good little practice.
So what's your take on the ego, and how does that impact our fear of death?
Well, from what I can gather, looking back at my life, and I've researched my life all the way back to when I was conceived in my mom's womb, the ego seems to be a construct that we all buy into for lack of deeper spiritual knowingness. And one of my struggles as a young boy growing up was I never felt that people saw me. I felt that they saw my body, Lloyd's son, Marge's son, and they saw something, but they didn't see deeply to my core. So I think what the ego was for me was a replacement for my spirituality. I needed something to hang on to that I could identify myself by and that others could identify me by. And so I think the ego was a result of lack of spiritual training from a very young age, lack of spiritual recognition. So I've got to have something to hang on to, so I'll make something up, and on goes the mask. So here I am. I'm Stephen Garrett, and I used to be a stockbroker, and I got a wife, and I got a car, and you can identify me. And letting all that go, man, that was a real spiritual practice. Recognizing that none of that is me, that that's all just stuff, was, I think, for me, more difficult than letting go of my body will be. I got very identified in the role I played as a spiritual teacher, as an author, as a public speaker, as a workshop leader. I started to get identified. And although I was spiritual in my practice, my ego still was getting stroked and still liked it. And to let all that go was, it took a lot of breathing, a lot of support, and a tremendous amount of trust, not only in the universe, but in my ability to just be and not be so busy doing, and to let go of that connection between beingness and doingness, because most of us are identified by what we do. So yeah, it took a fair bit to let go, and because I was able to let go and trust myself, I now find that I'm quite a fearless liver of life. I don't hold back so much. I just step right into the ring, whether it's Muhammad Ali or Michael Tyson, or I just step right into the ring with life because I don't feel separate from it so much.
This topic of beingness that you just spoke of, can you expand on that a little bit?
Absolutely. Almost anywhere I look, people are doing things. Most places where I look, they're too busy doing to really get that there's somebody in their body being as they're doing what they're doing. It may sound a bit like wordsmithing or semantics, but for me, I met a guru in India. He was 113 years old. He'd been meditating since he was 6. That guy didn't even have to speak. His beingness was so full, so large, so real, so vital. When I walked into his space, I was almost knocked over by his presence, or his charisma, or his nature. And it was his beingness that I bumped into. He wasn't doing anything. He was simply sitting, being. He didn't even have to speak. His energy was so full. So for me, that's an example of an individual so present in his body. His effect on the entire 12 people that came into his room, some people passed out, some people burst into tears, some people were weeping with joy, and some people weeping with sadness. It was this profound example of how powerful beingness can be and how rarely we see it in North American culture because we don't spend any time developing it. We spend all our time developing our capacity to do, to fly an airplane, to run a workshop, to dig in the garden, to drive a car. We seldom sit and focus on the beingness that's busy doing all the doing. I was once in an airport in Seattle, and there's this fellow, shoeshine fellow, and he had a lineup of 20 people to get their shoes shined, and they all looked a little down and a little glum. When they left his shoe shine space, they had a big grin on their face, and they seemed lighter and happier. On his shoe shine can, it said, "Shines $5." There were only $20 bills in his can. So I went up to see this guy because I was so curious. And what he was doing was, with his beingness, he was pretending to shine people's shoes, but really shining their beingness. So it was like this beingness beacon. And every time I go through Seattle, I stop and say hello to Brian, and I let him shine my beingness because that's exactly what he's doing. People just didn't really get what he was up to. So beingness is really letting the spirit of me shine through all my doingness and letting it be first and my doingness be second.
Hmm. If there's somebody listening to this discussion, Stephen, and they want to be a Brian, what do you suggest that they do?
Oh, that's a good question. I suggest that in the morning when they wake up, take some time not only to feel their mind, their body, and their emotions, but to notice, there's something else here. What is that? What is that something else that's here? And to spend 5 minutes in the morning just being with that feeling of kind of like, wow, there is something else here. At night before bed, give gratitude for the day that you lugged your beingness around with you as you were busy doing. In other words, pay attention to who's home and honor that one by paying attention to it. You don't have to spend a lot of time in your meditation room. Throughout the day, you can just notice, take a breath. Whew, slow it all down. Feel with your whole beingness who's there. Notice that there's somebody here. And spend some time with that beingness, more focused and more consciously. And allow that beingness to become a mystery and get curious about it. I've been around a lot of death, Graham, and I've seen probably 1,500 dead bodies if I've seen one. What I've noticed by witnessing dead bodies that way is that whoever was living that body is no longer there. That beingness is missing from the body. So when I look at the body, it's like just bones and meat. The beingness is missing. And others who have witnessed the death of their loved ones say exactly the same thing. That's not Grandpa. That's not Dad. That's not Sister. That's just their body. So putting our attention on that plus something that isn't there when we die is a very good practice.
Stephen, when people come to their deathbed, you say that there's 3 questions that they ask. Did I make a difference? Will people remember me? And did I mistreat anyone?
Yeah.
Can you
That's correct.
Can you embellish on that? And why do you think that people come to just those 3 questions?
Well, I can embellish on it, and really what it is at the moment of death is we're way closer to our beingness or our spirit than at any other time in our life. It's unavoidable. And when we do that, when we confront ourselves in that sacred way or in that spiritual way, all that seems to matter is our relationships. Was I in good relationship? Did I treat people well? Did I treat myself well? Will my loved ones miss me? Did I make a difference on the planet? Another one that comes up is, did I live my life my way, or did I live somebody else's life their way? In other words, was I true to my core? Was I true to my spirit? Did I really live my life? And those questions come up over and over and over again in a myriad of different ways, but it always gets down to the same thing. Did I make a difference? Did somebody notice me? Did I leave the planet better than it was before I was here? Will my wife miss me? You know, all very basic, simple questions. Nobody has ever spoken to me about their career, about their BMW, about money, about their job or their work. They only talk about things they regret, which typically focus on relationship. And did they live a good life, and did they not injure others along the way?
So would you say that it's our ego that drives us to put so much focus on our work and our money and things that don't really matter?
Yes. And it's not that those things, you know, material substance or abundance don't matter. It's just that they need to be in their rightful place, which is behind who I am. They're secondary. And primary is, how do I exist in the world? How do I be in the world? What is my essence? What is the energy I'm putting into the planet? That's the primary thing. You know, I live in a very nice house. I've got a nice car. I've got a nice wife. I've got some money in the bank. And all that's fine. But I put more attention on who I'm being as I set out in my everyday life. And what seems to happen, Graham, is the more my beingness is out there, the more abundance tends to come my way. Only because I'm being real. And in our culture, whether it's with our business people or our politicians or anybody on the street, it's our beingness that is missing. So if we can get through the worry that I won't be taken care of, if we can get through the ego attachment to, I got a bigger house than Sam down the street, what we find is I'll let go of all that, and it all comes back, oddly enough. But I don't have to clutch to it. I don't have to hang on to it. It's not me that I'm hanging on to. I don't have to hang on to it because it takes less effort not to be honest. And, you know, I used to think that if I let it all go, it would never come back. That's not true. And because I'm not attached to it, I'm more open to change than I would have been had I been attached to it. I flow more easily through the world. I change my career more readily when it's appropriate to. I let go of a home when I need to let go of a home, or a relationship when I need to let go of the relationship. I'm not stuck to them or clinging to them or hanging on to them as my form of personal identification.
Stephen, would you agree that suicide is on the increase in the world? And how do we handle suicide?
You're right, especially amongst our youth. There's a rising rate of suicide. And I think how we handle it is we listen to the person who's suicidal and listen to them deeply. I'm working with a young man, and he struggles with the world. He struggles with capitalism. He struggles with poverty. He struggles with this whole structure we've got going on, to the point that it's almost killing him. And so he wants to end it because the pain is so intense for him. So all I do with him is I listen to him. I understand him. I ask questions. I try and get to the core of what his deep dissatisfaction is, and then try and steer him in a direction where that deep dissatisfaction can be turned into an activity that may make the world a better place. And I think a lot of it stems from the fact that some of our young people recognize that money isn't our God, though it looks like it. And they want to do things differently. They're just having a hard time finding an example of how it could be different. This young man doesn't want a 9 to 5, and he doesn't want to sell his soul to his boss. He doesn't want to be in the matrix, so to speak. He wants to set out on his own life. It's just hard to find an example of how to do that. So I think suicide is on the rise. It's a very difficult issue to deal with when it occurs in life, because the survivors typically fall into the guilt place of, if only I had have called Sam one more time, if only I had have visited him more often, if only, if only. So it's a difficult one to get through, coupled with the mental health issue and the assumption that's not spoken that the person must have been crazy. So of all death, the death that is most taboo is suicide. And for those who survive a suicide, the silence that's almost deafening around the grief process is really hard to get through, because nobody knows what to say and they don't know what to say, so they just shut up and grieve silently, which is almost impossible to do and not very healthy. Grief, Graham, is a community event. It's not a solo journey. It takes a community to grieve well, and so when there's a suicide and there's silence around it, the community itself is impoverished. And I'll be doing some work up in northern British Columbia with some of the First Nations Indian bands around that very issue. It's bringing suicide into life and not being silent about it, and giving people the chance to grieve and let go and get on with life.
Acceptance is grieving is just a part of that, isn't it? It's a part of coming to terms with death and accepting that that's the way it is.
Absolutely, and that's why the name of my website, Embrace Your Death. Accept your death doesn't have quite the same ring, but that's exactly what it is we need to accept the fact that our loved one has passed and we'll never hug them again. And that final acceptance is like it's like a really sharp knife. It just cuts through the illusion that we're wishing they were back. It really does counteract denial, which most of us are in. You know, oh, it's a bad dream, or mom's going to walk through the door tomorrow, that kind of stuff. Acceptance itself is a very, very important thing to do if we're going to get on with the journey of grief and get through the joys of the life that was lived and celebrate it, get through the sadness and the sorrow. We've got to accept it first and foremost.
Stephen, can you explain the gift that we're able to receive through somebody's passing?
Oh, absolutely. That's a piece of the work that I'm most excited about. Is when you really sit down with your loved one and really accept the fact that they're dead and that you're going to miss them, and you really accept the fact that they were alive and look back at their life for meaning for them, for wisdom from them, for the unique gift that they brought to you, you'll find it. It doesn't matter whether the individual who passes is 6 months old or 96 years old. Each one who passes leaves a gift for all their family members and friends. What happens when somebody passes is we get so one-dimensional, we're so grief-stricken, we look at the death side and the loss side, we forget, oh, there's another side of that coin. Where were the gifts? This is why the celebration of life movement is starting to catch on, is it brings balance to the grief process. Yes, my dad died. Yes, I miss him deeply. And he left me the gift of integrity. My dad taught me all about integrity. Without my dad on the planet, I wouldn't have learned about it. So there's always a gift around. It was different for me than it was for my brother, because my brother's a different man. He got a different gift from my father. But if you look closely at the life lived and give it meaning, that meaning always translates to a gift for the one looking back at the life. And when we find the gift, it's not that it takes the grief or the sadness away, it brings balance to it. And it actually allows the grieving process to be more full and more healthy and more complete.
This has been a very rich discussion, Stephen. Is there anything that you would like to impart to those listening before we wind up that you would see as being impactful?
Good question, Graham, and yes. I've looked all over this planet for the Grim Reaper, which is the notion that, death is black and dark and grim and horrible and like macabre. I can't find the son of a gun. He's nowhere to be found. That tells me that the Grim Reaper is merely a myth or a belief. What would happen if we made up a different myth? That in fact death was a inspirational teacher. If we changed our relationship with death from the Grim Reaper and let that go and embrace death as an inspirational teacher, I'll guarantee you we would approach it differently in life. It would be different in the churches. It would be different in the hospitals. It would be different in the hospices. It would be different in old age homes, because we wouldn't be so frightened to sit with an inspirational teacher, where we might be frightened to sit with the Grim Reaper.
Absolutely. Well, for those of you who are watching this on video, I think you can see that Stephen has a presence and a connectedness about him because he's overcome this fear of death. And I think your work is a much needed thing, Stephen, and I commend you for really hanging in there and bringing this, availing it to the people. I think it's amazing.
Thank you, Graham. I appreciate your kind words, and gosh, it's fun watching you do your work and getting to know you as a human being and as a human being plus something.
Exactly. So let's wind it up there, Stephen. Can you just direct people to where they could find you on the internet?
Absolutely. You can find me at www.embraceyourdeath.com.
Excellent. So I'd like to thank everybody for watching or listening to this discussion. I'd like to ask you to do me a favor if you could go on to the Be Empowered show on iTunes and leave a review or a testimonial as to what you got out of this discussion, then that would serve everybody, because that would mean that the ratings go up and it'll reach a broader audience. If you've got any questions that you'd like Stephen or myself to answer, you can contact Stephen at his website. I also have a website at www.beempoweredgroup.com. I have a download there called Know Your True Value and Worth, and I think, Stephen, you would agree that really what we've been talking about a lot this evening is people knowing who they are and the value that they hold for themselves.
Absolutely.
So I'd like to thank everybody. We wish you a wonderful future of peace and abundance and the ability to be able to look death squarely in the face. Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to the Be Empowered podcast. For more on regaining your power by bridging that gap between who you think you are right now and who you really are, go to www.beingempoweredgroup.com and enter your name and email address to receive a free ebook and get notified of any upcoming podcasts. Remember, when you know and feel connected to your spiritual mind, you master your world. Changing your energy transforms your life.